On a rainy afternoon, 12-year-old girl with torn shoes and an empty stomach spotted something that would change her life forever. A luxury car skidded across the wet road, crashing into a ditch. Inside sat a millionaire, dazed and helpless. Without thinking, the little girl rushed forward, risking her own safety to pull him out. But when the chaos cleared and the man looked into her eyes, he whispered something so unexpected, so life-altering, that it left her trembling in tears. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the beginning of a story no one could have imagined. The little girl's name was Lila. At just 12 years old, she carried burdens far heavier than her fragile frame should have endured. Her family lived on the edge of survival in a run-down neighborhood where every day meant choosing between food and rent. Her mother worked long hours cleaning houses, while her father had vanished years ago, leaving behind only unanswered questions. Lila often wandered the streets after school, hoping to find odd jobs or discarded items she could trade for a few coins. That stormy afternoon, the sky was heavy with dark clouds and the streets shimmered with puddles. Lila's stomach growled, but she pressed on, clutching an old umbrella that barely kept her dry. As she turned the corner, the sound of screeching tires sliced through the rain. She froze. A sleek, expensive car spun out of control, slammed into a ditch, and came to a violent stop against a tree. Instinct replaced fear. Lila dropped her umbrella and sprinted toward the wreck. Through the shattered window, she saw a man well-dressed, older, and clearly someone far removed from her world of hunger and struggle. His eyes flickered weakly, blood staining his shirt. People from nearby shops peeked out, but no one moved closer. With trembling hands, Lila forced the car door open and pulled with all her strength. The man groaned, barely conscious. Rainwater mixed with gasoline around her feet, but she didn't stop. She tugged until he stumbled out of the vehicle, collapsing onto the muddy ground. Breathless and soaked, Lila stood over him, unsure what to do next. It was then that his lips parted and he whispered words that would pierce her young heart. Forever, the man Lila had pulled from the wreck was no ordinary stranger. His name was Victor Harland, a powerful millionaire whose face often appeared on the covers of magazines she had seen tossed aside in the trash. Known for his lavish parties and ruthless business empire, he was the kind of person who seemed untouchably at here he was, lying helpless in the rain, depending on a girl who owned nothing but courage. Lila tried shaking him, urging him to stay awake, but her small voice was lost under the storm. She looked around, desperately still. No one stepped forward to help. Some whispered, others just stared. To them, she was only a poor black child meddling where she didn't belong. Their hesitation burned into her heart. But it also made her more determined. She tore a strip from her worn dress and pressed it against his wound to slow the bleeding. Her hands trembled, but her eyes stayed focused. Stay alive, she thought fiercely, as if sheer willpower could keep him breathing. Minutes felt like hours until finally, the wail of sirens cut through the storm. Paramedics rushed in, lifting Victor onto a stretcher. One of them glanced at Lila, then quickly dismissed her, as though her role in saving him didn't matter. They loaded him into the ambulance, and in the blink of an eye, the millionaire was gone. Lila stood there, shivering, rain soaking her thin clothes, feeling invisible. She had risked everything, and no one even acknowledged her. She returned home quietly that night, hiding her torn dress from her mother and going to bed with hunger in her belly. But behind the hospital walls, Victor. Harlan's mind clung to one fleeting memory, the image of a small girl with determined eyes dragging him out of death's grip. In his world, people bowed to him out of fear or greed. No one had ever reached out selflessly, without expecting anything in return. Days passed before he demanded to know who had saved him. When he asked his assistants, they shrugged. No one had bothered to learn her name. That ignorance ignited something in him, a realization that the world he lived in was blind to the people who truly mattered. He sent investigators into the neighborhood until finally they found her. Lila was sweeping the floor of a corner store when a black car pulled up outside. She looked up, startled, as men in sharp suits entered. They didn't belong there. Customers whispered nervously. And then, stepping in behind them, came Victor Harland himself, no longer weak and broken, but standing tall. His gaze fixed on the girl who had saved his life. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the unlikely pair, the billionaire and the poor girl whose paths were never meant to cross. What would happen next would shake both of their worlds to the core. The air inside the store felt heavy as Victor Harland stepped closer. Customers pretended to browse shelves, but their eyes followed every movement. Lila froze, clutching the broom handle, unsure if she should run or stand still. She had never seen him so close before. The man she had dragged through mud and rain now stood in a tailored suit that seemed out of place against the cracked tiles of the shop floor. Victor's gaze softened as he looked at her. But the room's silence made it impossible for her to feel safe. Then one of his aides spoke sharply, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This girl? She's the one." His tone dripped with doubt, as though the idea of a poor black child being a hero was absurd. A ripple of laughter followed from a few onlookers, feeding the tension. Lila's cheeks burned. For a moment, she wished she had never acted that night. But before the shame could consume her, Victor raised his hand, silencing the room. His voice, steady and commanding, carried the weight of truth. "Without her, I would not be standing here." Gasps filled the store. The same people who mocked her now stared in stunned disbelief. Lila blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of his words. He wasn't just acknowledging her, he was lifting her above all the sneers, stripping away the invisibility she had lived under her whole life. Victor then did something even more shocking. In front of everyone, he bowed his head slightly, a gesture of gratitude that no one had ever expected from a man of his status, for a billionaire used to control, pride, and authority. Lowering himself to honor a poor girl was almost unthinkable. That moment shattered the divide between them. The walls of wealth and poverty, of color and class, trembled. Lila's small act of courage had turned into something much larger, a public reckoning, where people could no longer ignore the truth. It was no longer just about saving a man's life, was about revealing a power greater than money or privilege. And as the crowd looked on in silence, one question hung in the air. What would he do for her now? The store remained silent long after Victor's words echoed off its walls. People who had once mocked or dismissed Lila now shifted uncomfortably, as if the weight of their own cruelty pressed down on them. For the first time, she wasn't just the invisible girl sweeping floors. She was someone whose courage demanded recognition. Victor turned to his aide and spoke firmly. "Everything she needs, we provide. Education, home, food, safety. From this day forward, she is not abandoned." His declaration wasn't just for Lila, was for everyone in that room, and for everyone who would eventually hear this story. He wasn't simply repaying a debt. He was making a statement about dignity, worth, and justice. Tears welled in Lila's eyes. The world had never been kind to her. She had grown used to surviving in shadows, unnoticed except when mocked. But now, under the gaze of the wealthiest man in the city, she felt the weight of something unfamiliar. Hope, not just for herself, but for others like her. News of the incident spread quickly. The story of the poor girl who saved a millionaire became a topic of discussion everywhere, on street corners, in classrooms, and across television networks. But the part that stunned the public most wasn't the accident or even her act of bravery. It was the way Victor, a man of unimaginable power, had knelt before her and declared her life valuable. For weeks afterward, strangers approached Lila differently. Some offered food, others encouragement. But most importantly, those who had once dismissed her with sneers began to see her with new eyes. One girl's act of compassion had cracked the armor of arrogance that coated her community. Lila didn't suddenly become wealthy, nor did all her struggles vanish. Life was still hard, but now she had an education to look forward to, meals she didn't have to fight for, and a sense of belonging that no amount of money could replace. She carried herself differently, not because of what she had been given, but because she finally understood that her worth had never depended on her poverty, or on anyone's opinion. Victor Harlan, too, was changed. For all his power, he realized that his life had been saved not by security systems or riches, but by the bravery of a child the world had overlooked. In boardrooms and interviews, he began speaking openly about the injustice of poverty, using his influence to push for change. It was his way of honoring the girl who had reminded him of his own humanity. And so, from a rainy roadside rescue grew a story that refused to be forgotten. One girl's courage and one man's humility collided to reveal a truth the world desperately needed to hear. That real power lies not in wealth, but in compassion, because at the end of the day, what matters most isn't how high you stand, but how deeply you're willing to bow for what is right.